Total disclaimer, we're just three white men drinking in safety. From the Truth and Beauty Laboratory in Carrollton, Georgia, welcome to episode 6 of Fake News Podcast. I'm Sean Jepson with Sean Caffrey beside me, and joining us on Skype from Farmington, New Mexico, Jason Rains. This week, we discuss Trump's continuing war on the media, the role of private prisons in America, the president's announcement to crack down on human trafficking, and the state of the Democratic Party. Also, Erick Dunlap joins us in the studio from Athens, Georgia for a local beer tasting. We have a big show for you this week, so strap in and let's get to it. All right, before we begin, we need to address some housekeeping issues. First up, we have a new theme song that we are very excited about. Tyler Key from the band Falco Brown in Athens, Georgia wrote the theme song you just heard. And all of the music in this episode is going to be from Tyler Key and Falco Brown. We're very big fans of their music. You can check out Falco Brown on Spotify and on Facebook. They just released a new EP, New Old Stock Part 1. Go check that out and give them some love. And if you are in the Atlanta area for St. Patrick's Day, go check out Falco Brown live at the Vinyl on March 17th. Next, we are in the process of getting a website up and running. Right now, you can check out our episodes on fakenewspodcast.podbean.com. We're working on getting our own domain up, but for right now, you can check us out on fakenewspodcast.podbean.com. Also, you can now like us on Facebook at Fake News Podcast. You can follow us on Twitter at Fake News Pod. That's at Fake News Pod. Also, you can check out our YouTube channel, Fake News Podcast. We'll be posting episodes there as well, and who knows, maybe down the road we'll do some video podcasts so you can see our ugly faces. Finally, we are working on getting our podcast on iTunes for you. I'm hoping that process will be complete by next week, and we'll let you know when that's available. For those of you that have been following us on SoundCloud, be advised that we will be phasing out uploading the episodes there. We'll probably put this episode and maybe one more episode up on SoundCloud, and then we'll move on. So lots of ways to follow us now. Like us and let us know what you think about this episode. And then go check out Falco Brown. All right, welcome back to Fake News Podcast. I'm Sean Jepson. This is Sean Caffrey sitting next to me, and we have joining us on Skype from Farmington, New Mexico, Jason Rains. Thank you for joining us. I want to talk about in this segment Trump's ongoing feud with the media. We saw this week Sean Spicer elected instead of having a televised press conference. He decided to hold what they call a gaggle, a more private conference in his office. And so when the press pool made their way down the hallway to his office, CNN was turned away. Another number of other news organizations was turned away, said they were not invited. AP News, I think it was AP and Washington Post, both objected to that and boycotted the press conference. And then afterwards, when it got out what had happened, a number of other news organizations came out, including even Fox News said that. And also, in addition to that, Trump announced that he was not going to appear at the White House Correspondents' Dinner, which has been a tradition, something that celebrates the First Amendment. So one of the things I want to talk about is this role in media and what does Trump gain by trying to tear down these traditional media outlets. If you look back at the election, I would say that, yes, while President Obama was one of the first that had a presence on social media, his administration, you saw a presence like none other. The media, I feel like the internet particularly, had more of an influence on this last presidential election than ever before. We can look at, say, like 4chan and Reddit, some of these sites that were able to manipulate the algorithms of those particular sites to boost their own views. The Donald was created on Reddit, and there's talks that there were a lot of bots that were probably operated from Russia that were building up their subreddit to the point where it got to it ends up gathering more real people to it. Combine this with the Russian hacks on the DNC and then leaking the emails to influence the election. So we know that Russia is engaging in cyber warfare. We also know, thanks to Edward Snowden, that the United States has this massive surveillance operation on pretty much everyone on the internet. So what I guess I would posit to you guys, I'll let you guys, Jason, I'll throw this to you first. What happens if if Russia, through Trump, gets their hands on this surveillance operation that the United States has, where they can keep track of everyone and can tear down the traditional media sites so that you're getting your news from the internet? What do you believe that's possible, that could be happening, and what do you think could be the consequences of this?
Well, I'm not worried specifically about Russia getting its hands on American intelligence. I don't know that Trump and Putin are that close yet. I do think, though, I think you're onto something when you're talking about, traditional media outlets kind of being undermined, having sort of unjustified doubts cast on the credibility of people like the New York Times. You know, Trump banned the New York Times from his press gaggle. And we've talked about this on the show before. I think he's trying to create a situation where there is just so much confusion over what's true and what's not that you're just going to go and find the information that you find most comforting or that you find most affirming of your worldview. And for most people, that's going to be bullshit that they found on the internet.
And who controls that information? I mean, you could say Steve Bannon had a share in that. Fox News has a share in that. But does Russia have a share in that? Who controls that bullshit information that gets upvoted by hackers and bots on the internet, so that ends up making the top of social media networks? And then you read this, Joe Blow reads this and goes, well, that's crazy. Look at what the Democrats are doing, or look at whoever's doing. Who controls that information?
Well, clearly this is not without precedent. I mean, the form of a hand-picked gaggle is not, unique to the Donald Trump administration. Obama did it, Bush did it, Clinton did it. Clinton did it a lot, quite frankly. Reagan was the master at it. So this needs to be put in context, I think, a little bit. But, when you set the precedent that I'm going to exclude news agencies that disagree or take exception with what I'm doing, then you're assaulting the First Amendment. I hesitate to use strong rhetoric that could be taken out of context, but I would think that's unconstitutional. That is a violation of First Amendment rights on the behalf of the news agencies that were vetted and were allowed into the White House briefing room. And I think it's another short-sighted move that is based on Donald Trump's temper, meaning that if you don't agree with me all the time, just like all the cronies that I've hired to the Trump organization over the last 30 years, then you have no place at the table.
But this goes farther than that. Yes, there have been presidents who have favored some media outlets more than others, but you have, like we said, Trump has announced that he's not going to attend the White House Correspondents' Dinner. That's something unprecedented. Reagan missed it because he was shot at 3 days before the dinner. That's something that we expect our president to kind of let their hair down and engage with the press and acknowledge their role in this. It's also, we've never seen a president actually go after major news organizations like this and call them out for fake news for what you said is just I don't like the bad press that you're publishing about me. We've hinted at this idea that maybe this is more strategic for the Trump administration than before. So I'm looking at, is it simply we're just trying to create enough confusion so you don't know what the right answer is? Or is there something behind the scenes pulling the strings that is trying to influence people?
Well, I can tell you why he's not doing the correspondence dinner. He can't tell a joke. For 8 years, Obama got up there and was just fucking hilarious. And Trump's not a funny guy. He doesn't have a sense of humor. He doesn't have that ability to relax and laugh at himself. And I don't think that has anything to do with his war on the press, personally. I think just everyone at the White House, himself included, realized, like, he can't get up there and bomb. Come on. So I don't know. On that, I think that's just, protect Trump from embarrassing himself. On the other stuff,
too late.
Yeah, I think we're trying to say, I know, too little, too late. But in general, no, I do agree that I think they're trying to sow confusion. And ultimately, you're asking who controls that information that gets out there. I don't think ultimately it matters. I don't think it's about getting people to accept one set of facts. I think it's just about getting people to think that facts can't be known.
Well, if you ask certain people who, I think regardless of what the facts are getting, I think you have a lot of people that would very fervently believe that still to this date that Barack Obama is a Kenyan Muslim. So there were people, I think you can back them into a corner to the point where they could say, well, who knows? But that's usually just a fallacy when you don't have anything left in your argument. The idea of seeking out information is in the hopes that you can obtain knowledge. So why would you seek out information if you're really reluctant to accept any knowledge that you get?
Yeah, exactly. And I think that unfortunately, we're moving toward an era where media literacy is on the decline and people are just less able to separate good information from bad, less able to seek out good information for themselves, less able to keep conflicting narratives straight in their head. And I think a big part of that, is this, this internet news culture where for a lot of websites, there's not a whole lot of fact checking and not a lot of effort made to establish credibility. I think that gets in people's heads and it confuses them, and they don't know what's what.
Well, I can speak to that just based on what I saw this morning. I watch all the Sunday shows when I have time, when I'm not working or doing schoolwork. But Chris Wallace had Sean Spicer on Fox News Sunday this morning, and I know it's very rare for anybody at this circle to ever watch that show. I do every Sunday morning just so I know what the other side is thinking. But he tore that man a new asshole. You don't win friends by attacking CNN. You win friends by growing the economy, providing jobs to the very blue collar people that you claim to represent, that your cabinet completely doesn't represent, and he tore him up. And little Sean Spicer, to quote Joe Scarborough, had no answer. And so we've got to get out of this headspace that media outlets that we assume we don't agree with are inherently evil and inherently biased, and that they're only doing the bidding of their corporate masters, because that's not always true. That's not always true.
Right. And Bill O'Reilly also had an interview with President Trump and really held his feet to the fire on that. So Fox News is not in agreement with this idea of freezing out certain media organizations. You are right on that. And I think Fox News is less like, than say something like Breitbart.com or something that's more tabloid, or something like InfoWars, or which are being allowed at the seat of the table to, alongside with the New York Times, to ask questions. So I agree with you on that. Chris Wallace, I have a lot of respect for him, and Fox News has been pushing back on this idea that you're not going to run over the media like this. That's not what we want to see our government do. That's terrifying.
1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. drive a new Benz with a vanity plate that reads high, 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 high. It reads high, 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 high. Well, I was born a rebel, but a clean up nice. Donations to the cause start at the low, low price of high, 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 high. I need a high, 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 high. Oh, I got a lucky man. Oh, I got a lucky man. Well, some folks, they just don't understand. Oh, how I got a lucky man.
Okay, welcome back to the Fake News Podcast. Real quick, I want to talk about one of Trump's cabinet members, Jeff Sessions, who, in my opinion, is probably the most disastrous person that he has added to that cabinet. I might have said Michael Flynn. Flynn's gone. Now it's just Jeff Sessions by a landslide, if you ask me. One of the big problems that people have had with him is that he appears to believe in voter suppression as a legitimate political tactic. Like in his jurisprudence, he believes that it is acceptable for legislators to change laws in such a way as to manipulate the demographic breakdown of voter turnout. So that's a big problem with him. But something came out this week that stuck out to me that I wanted to talk about a little here and kind of use as a springboard to talk about what Jeff Sessions' outlook on law and order really is. So toward the end of the Obama administration, his Justice Department announced a plan to start phasing out the use of private federal prisons. This week, Jeff Sessions sent out a memo to the rest of the Trump administration, announcing that he was going to reverse that plan, that they were not going to phase out private federal prisons. And the specific thing that he said about it, and this is a direct quote, he said that it impaired our ability to meet the future needs of the federal correctional system. In other words, this guy is expecting to lock a bunch of people up. I think, Donald Trump himself has kind of presented himself as a law and order president, has sort of suggested that there would be a big nationwide crackdown, and this seems to be a part of that. And so, I don't know. I want to kick this to you, Caffrey, and see what you think. Do you feel like this is a bad direction for Sessions to be taking the Justice Department?
Well, absolutely. I mean, absolutely. And I don't think anybody in their right mind that understood Jeff Sessions and has followed him. And we're, right next door in Georgia, so we're aware of who this man is. We've seen him come up through the ranks for the last 20 years. There's nothing surprising here. I mean, we would take your shocked hat off and put your I knew this was going to happen hat on, because, I mean, he hasn't done anything that we didn't expect him not to do. Of course, this is what he's going to do. He's going to privatize prisons, which is a horrible mistake. When you run a prison as a for-profit business, that means the inmates are going to be left in the most cheaply, inhumanely conditions possible, because we're trying to grind every penny out of this because we're trying to make money off of it. And the more inmates, the better. Because that means my private company that's running this prison makes more money. I mean, I'm fairly familiar with how they write their contracts from the federal government when they have a privatized prison. The money you get from the state or from the federal government is based completely on your inmate population. So when you have a attorney general that is in favor of this, it stands to reason that inmate populations are going to increase. And so all the statutes that were on the books that Barack Obama directed his DOJ not to enforce and to relax their attitude on are now front and center. I mean, it reminds me of the episode when Mr. Burns built a prison and Homer went to jail for kicking a can. That's a hard 3. Get his ass. And so that's exactly what we're looking at. It's exactly what we're looking at. Don't be shocked. Don't be appalled. I mean, it is what it is, and now we're gonna have to go through it. Last night, I sat down with my wife and watched a documentary about Rikers Island in New York City, This is where they hold people that are not able to make bond. These people have not been convicted yet. They've just been charged, but they're too poor to make bond. And they're held in the most deplorable conditions that you can possibly imagine. And that's by the state of New York that spends $50,000 a year per inmate. So what happens when a for-profit company is in charge of their accommodations while they're a guest of the state? That gets worse. And it's already pretty goddamn terrible.
Let me add a little bit of context to this, too. In America, there are two main companies that profit off of private prisons. There's one called CoreCivic. It used to be called Corrections Corporation of America. And there's one called the Geo Group. Those are the two main companies that are making money off of this. And both of these donated generously to Donald Trump's campaign.
And to the inauguration fund.
And so, like, is there, I don't know, guys, is there like a little bit of, is there some pay to play going on here?
Yeah, I think so. When you're running privatized businesses and you have a corporation that can lobby heavily towards the president and the administration and in Congress. One of the things, like, I believe that Obama administration had agreed to phase out privatized prisons is because dollars and cents, it wasn't showing to save any costs by turning it over to private companies. And also you were starting to see a rise in abuses. You'd either see prisoners being treated inhumanely, or you would even see there have been times where judges have been caught making backroom deals with some of these companies and sticking heavy incarcerations onto people who probably otherwise didn't deserve that, because of what Caffrey attests to, is that they're looking to build their numbers. The more prisoners you have, the more money you get from it. The other thing I'm kind of concerned about is that crime has been steadily declining for years and years, but the Trump administration has, during the campaign, had been claiming that crime has been going up. And that crime has been going up, that we've seen it like we've never seen before, which was all bullshit. But you've already put that perception in people's minds that we need to restore to law and order. And so who is he filling these prisons up with? Is one of the things is this going to coincide with the immigration crackdowns? Is this going to coincide with, I don't know what other crackdowns they have in mind? Some of this, I think that this leaves a lot of questions up in the air of what necessarily does the Trump administration think they're going to gain from taking this direction?
Yeah, and I think also it's particularly disheartening because this was one of the areas where Barack Obama made progress that nobody else had been able to make, that nobody else had really even tried to make. Because for years and years, the second you started talking about any kind of criminal justice reform, prison reform, police reform, anything of that nature, you were immediately painted as soft on crime. You would be drummed out of your next election. I mean, this was the third rail of American politics for so long and well past the point of common sense. And I always thought that it was kind of a courageous move on Obama's part to take this issue up when, many people were not asking him to. It's always been a kind of a liability to talk about this in politics. And he actually got some stuff done, moved away from this strict enforcement model, started phasing out the private prisons, started showing some leniency on things like minor drug crimes. And I don't know, it looks like that's all going away, and we're going to go back to this like Reagan era, tough on crime, war on drugs, lock everybody up, mandatory minimum. I think that's the environment that these guys are going to try to create, and it's really sad. I don't know, Caffrey, what do you think, man? Is it that bad?
No, it absolutely is, and I think it's a case of Back to the Future. I mean, we had a brief shining spot in the history of the federal government's attitude on criminal justice over the last 8 years, and Barack Obama was a pioneer in that respect, and he caught a lot of flack for it because, middle America, Trump voters don't necessarily love the idea of releasing drug offenders back in their community when they've only served a half of their sentence. They're all law and order types. And Barack Obama did it anyway. In fact, he was the first sitting president to ever visit a federal supermax facility and sit down with, murderers and drug runners and rapists and sit there and talk to them about what it was like for them to live their lives in prison and how awful it obviously is. But again, there is nothing here that was not advertised for the last 2 years. There should be no surprises. And unfortunately, America, you made your bed, you're going to lie in it. And I see this on my college campus on a daily basis. The city of Carrollton has declared that the University of West Georgia is a haven for marijuana crime and a black market in marijuana, and they have decided to make an example of that institution. And I had my midterms this week, and I had to go through 2 different roadblocks on 2 different days just to get to the building where I was supposed to take my examination. I had my car searched once, had my license and insurance card checked the second time. And so there's no surprises here. And as much as the 3 of us sitting around these microphones find fault with that, rightfully so, as much as we find fault with that, the constituents of the men and women that are in power right now in Washington applaud it. They love it. So it's not going anywhere.
Why do they applaud it, though?
Because they see their country being taken away from them. They live in marginal neighborhoods. They have marginal high school diploma only blue collar jobs. They see minorities that they are inherently predisposed to be wary of and to treat as criminals moving into their barely middle class neighborhoods. And they see the crime rate going up. Whether that's true or not, that's the message they've been sold. And they believe it. They believe it. Richard Nixon got into the White House on this twice, on this exact same paradigm. And Donald Trump, or the people around him, because I don't believe for a second Donald Trump's smart enough to get this on his own, somebody put this idea in his head, has made hay off of it. And here we are.
I feel like this kind of dovetails into something that I know we've kind of discussed off air, and that's some laws that you're seeing pop up in response to Milo Yiannopoulos when he tried to speak at UC Berkeley, and protests came out. And from those protests, you had rioters break windows and set buildings on fire. Arizona recently has passed a bill through their state legislature attaching rioters to the RICO Act, which has traditionally been designed to crack down on organized crime. So now if you're guilty of rioting, and how they gather up rioters, the police, it's called kettling. They just round the whole crowd up, arrest them all, and then sort it out later to try to bring immediate peace. So if you're a poor guy who happened to be walking home from work, and now you get rounded up by the riot police, now the way the bill is going to propose is now the government can come, give you 25 to life, and seize your property. So, and
it goes further than that too. You could potentially be prosecuted if you planned a protest, if you organized a protest that turned violent.
Yeah.
Just in the course of it, even if you didn't call for that, even if that wasn't something that you orchestrated, because you were the person who organized the event that eventually became violent, yeah, you could be dragged into some kind of bullshit RICO case. It's insane.
Really? And then get locked up in one of these new private prisons that Jeff Sessions is going to help build.
Yeah. Well, I don't think that can withstand a legal challenge. I mean, I'm not a lawyer, but that seems to me a clear violation of the right to peaceably assemble. And you can't be individually responsible for somebody else's actions at your event.
The other thing is the rationale behind the RICO Act and the idea of we can seize your assets is this idea of you've accumulated your house, your car, and your bank account through organized crime. Therefore, we're going to hit you where we think it hurts. So what does a rioter stand to profit off of this? Did someone who was scene with the rioters, did they build their house and then buy their car from riots? That's not.
No. Well, the RICO statute was created to be able to prosecute, upper echelon organized crime officials or or personalities that never actually got their fingers dirty. They never actually engaged in an actual crime, but they were the figurehead of an organized criminal entity.
Right.
So, there, and again, I hate to be the devil's advocate today. I feel like that's becoming a recurring role here, but again, when you do have organizations like MoveOn.org, Indivisible, that are creating these protests, they're leaving it open, they're advertising these protests all across the nation. Come to Arizona, come to Colorado, come to Georgia, come to New York. And then crimes are committed in the pursuance of the event that they organized to create. That is not completely without, merit as far as the statute goes. Do I think it's a very horrible misapplication of the RICO statute and we're going completely off basis for what it was intended to be when it was written? Absolutely. But in a court of law, especially in a state that's dominated by Republican governors and legislators, that could hold water. That could hold water. It is not outside the statute as RICO was written.
Clearly, we're going to see in the coming years all manner of crackdowns on all manners of crime, old and new. So it's gonna be a rough time. We're gonna have many more opportunities to find fault with Jeff Sessions, I'm sure, and we'll leave it there with that.
So, ladies and gentlemen, I just wanted to take a minute to speak to what we have seen happen at the Democratic National Committee meeting here in Atlanta, and in my home state, right up the road. We have elected a new chairperson to represent the party going forward. Former Secretary of Labor Sanchez from the Clinton administration back in the 90s. Apparently, according to the media representation of how it went down, this was a very contentious conference. Ralph Ellis from Minnesota, the one and only Muslim member of Congress that we have, was considered to be the favorite. He was Bernie Sanders' pick to be the head of the DNC, and he drew most of his power from the Bernie Sanders wing of the Democratic Party. He was narrowly defeated, and before Sanchez could even be acknowledged as the new head of the DNC, we saw half of the delegates in the room in Atlanta shouting Donna Brazile down from the podium, booing her. The very first action that Sanchez took when he got to the microphone was to name Ralph Ellis as his co-chair and deputy. And that to me is kind of a very visual representation of the divisions that existed before the election, during the election, and apparently still exist after the election. And what concerns me as a lifelong Democrat in a very red state is that we are continuing to repeat the mistakes of the past, meaning that our tent cannot become united because I would offer that it might be too big. If you're not here to do the business of the liberal progressive agenda in the country, if you cannot swallow your pride long enough to realize what the bigger picture is, and if you're going to obstruct the movement of the progressive party in this country because you're not happy with the way that it's being led, then I consider that to be as much a part of the problem as fake news, ridiculous cabinet appointments. I think we're all in the same boat at this point. I think that the reason why Donald Trump is president right now is because what we saw happen in 2008 when Hillary Clinton lost the election, and she had a lot of very upset supporters that swore on a stack of Bibles that they would never support Barack Obama because they were upset that their person didn't win. They came home. And they voted for Barack Obama, whether he was their first choice or not. They came home and were loyal to their ideals and were loyal to the party that they claimed to be a member of. And we're not seeing that in 2016, 2017. We're not seeing that. And I think, I believe, I don't know empirically, but I do believe that is exactly why Hillary Clinton lost the election. When you see states like Pennsylvania, like Wisconsin, like Florida, that are typically in play for a Democratic candidate, when you see those going to a guy like Donald Trump and all the idiocy that he represents, that is not Donald Trump's charisma that made those states switch. That is Democrats that had their feelings hurt because their guy was not the nominee, that just decided to stay home, or they were so upset, they were the libertarian wing of the Democratic Party, that they decided to vote for somebody else. And as we go forward, the worst thing we can do as a progressive movement is present a front that is not completely unified. The reason why the Republicans have an advantage over the Democratic Party, the reason why we lose midterm elections, is because they are much more in lockstep with one another, despite their panoply of different beliefs, than the Democratic Party has ever been. And what we saw play out at the DNC in Atlanta this week is just another representation of that. So we're doomed to lose until we can agree that the higher good is better than our personal ideas. Yeah, I'll leave that up to the discussion before I get too passionate about it. But I just see us playing out the same mistakes of the past over and over and over again. And the only thing that does is play right into Donald Trump and Steve Bannon's hands.
Well, believe it or not, I largely agree with you. I think that the Democratic Party, you're kind of seeing it come apart right now. And they do not have their shit together. I do want to add one thing, though, that I think kind of contextualizes some of that anger that you see from, what you've called like the Bernie Sanders wing of the Democrats. A lot of people are tired of the Democratic Party ignoring the left and being nominally the left-wing party, but kind of keeping them in the back and pretending they're not really there and trying to, pushing this much more almost center-right front. I think a lot of people, and I felt this way, and I voted for Clinton, but I did feel some frustration that I feel like the Democrats expect my vote, but don't feel like they have to acknowledge, someone who's, and I know I'm not a far left person, but even I feel like I am outside of like what the Democrats will put on as a public face, even though I'm supposed to vote for them. They're supposed to be the left-wing party. And so I think people feel a lot of frustration about that. I think for a lot of people, Hillary Clinton was kind of the Democrats doubling down on this more center-right image at a time when it wasn't the right thing to do. And one of the reasons that she lost places like Wisconsin or Florida, in addition to Democrats staying home, which I'm going to agree with you, unconscionable. You got to get out there and vote. But part of it, too, is that she just could not connect with those working class voters that had been the core of the party for so long. And I almost feel like, Tom Perez is fine. I think he was a good labor secretary. I think he's going to do a good job. But I feel like, his election at the DNC recently is a really clear signal that like nothing's going to change. And the Democrats haven't learned what they did wrong, not just in terms of being divided and not being in lockstep, but like forgetting parts of their own base. So there's that. I don't know.
Well,
Judson, what do you think?
I would counter that by saying that Donald Trump won because he engaged parts of the electorate that have never factored on a campaign manager's map. And so, by going further to the left than we were already, how are we attacking and picking off and bringing into the big tent the very part of the electorate that was not engaged, that engaged for Donald Trump? How does going further to the left when we just had an election that proved that this country is not further to the left? That's not where we're leaning. We are a center-right country. That's a bona fide fact. Bill Clinton got elected to 2 terms and had one of the greatest presidencies in modern times as far as how well the country did as a result of it, because he did go to the center-right. So can you really fault the power brokers, the kingmakers, and the National Democratic Party apparatus for saying, no, we're not going to engage with the far left because we just were handed a resounding defeat because we might have shied too far to the left? I was there in 2008, okay? I'm just going to give you a very good example. College Democrats at the University of West Georgia, the school I'm currently enrolled in, had 2,800 members on the rolls in 2008. How many of them voted? 400. 400. So what benefit does the National Democratic Party have? How do they plan to pick off seats like the Secretary of Health, Tom Price's seat in Cobb County? How are we going to pick off that seat by going further to the left? We're not. And this is probably where we're really going with this, is an argument that the two-party system is dead. I think the Republicans went through their own growing pains and birthing pains as the Tea Party movement came forward. You saw some of the reaction to the never Trumpers inside of the Republican Party. You see that with John McCain and Lindsey Graham now. You see it inside the Democratic Party. Maybe the argument that we should be having, rather than what does the two-party system do to accommodate all of those that identify with them, maybe it's time to do away with the two-party system. My wife's from Canada. They have 7 parties. Nobody ever has a clear-cut majority. Because of that fact, they are forced to do business with one another. They're forced to relax their principles and make compromises and reach a consensus. And maybe the conversation we should be having, instead of what direction should the two national parties go in to satisfy their radical bases, maybe that's a defunct argument at this point. Maybe that's archaic and historically inaccurate now. Maybe the conversation should be, why do we only have 2 parties? And the deadlock that we're seeing, the entrangements that we're seeing, this us versus them mentality that is leading us down a road to absolute destruction. And again, me and Sean talked about this in the break. I don't think people really know what they're asking for. When you're asking for armed resistance and you're asking for civil unrest, do you know what that really is? Do you know what that really is? I'm sitting at the Truth and Beauty Lab. If we came to a real Civil War-like situation, that means the neighbors that surround this building will murder everybody in this house, leave their bodies in the yard, and then burn the building down. That's what a Civil War looks like. And I'm not talking hyperbole. That's a fact. Look it up in a history book. When Civil Wars happen, that's what happens. So be careful what you're asking for. And until we push it to that point, maybe we should look at a deconstruction, to take a word from Steve Bannon, of the current political dichotomy. Maybe it is time for multiple parties where everybody feels like they have a voice and they feel like they have a seat at a table. And because there is no clear-cut majority, because there are so many seats at the table, they're forced to compromise with each other. They're forced to negotiate and reach a consensus. I think that's the biggest problem facing this country right now, is the entrenchment of the two-party system. Sean, what do you think about that?
I agree. I think a lot of what we're seeing is a result of the two-party system. After 2008, you really saw the cracks form in the Republican Party. They organized the Tea Party, and then the Tea Party sort of has been fighting for control. And that vacuum of power is what allowed somebody like Donald Trump to seize control and take over. I do question that the Democratic Party has been moving more center right, because center right is what wins you national elections. But when you were talking about, to go back before, you're talking about the progressive party. Should we step out of the way? Should we have that? Now the conversation sort of morphed into, well, can't we do that? So now we're going to break off entirely. I don't know if that's the answer. The Republicans are trying to desperately hold control of their party because they understand that if by parties breaking off, then they inevitably will lose to the Democratic Party. But now we're seeing those same breaks in the Democratic Party. I don't think it's fair to blame people for not voting for the candidate that you think they should have voted for. Bernie Sanders kind of created this grassroots movement. I'm not necessarily all about Bernie Sanders at this point, but Bernie Sanders created this grassroots movement and got particularly a lot of young people involved in of politics, who otherwise probably wouldn't have not had any interest in politics. I think what you have is probably 40% of the country of eligible voters don't really pay attention to politics because, one, it just seems like a lot of doublespeak, turnaround, lies, backstabbing, and two, what does it have to do with me? It doesn't, they're not going to listen to what I have to say, and they're just going to do whatever they're going to do. So I think you have a lot of that. You have to, so that to say, well, they didn't vote for Hillary and that because they were butthurt about Bernie Sanders. I'm not going to say that there were none like that, but it is the responsibility of the candidate to go and reach those voters. And so, yes, we do have to look at Hillary Clinton didn't go to Wisconsin and Michigan, but Donald Trump did. And Donald Trump went there and says, the TPP is bad. I'm going to repeal that. I'm going to bring back jobs. This is something that they weren't hearing from the Democrats. So in what sense, the Democrats did drop the ball on that, got maybe a little too comfortable. And now they are facing that. Do we fight Donald Trump and the Republicans, and then do we have to watch our backs now with the left? But
you always have to watch your backs. You always have to watch your backs. Complacency is the downfall of entrenched political parties. You forget that at your peril. And the idea that Northeastern unionized blue-collar workers are the bedrock of the Democratic Party, I don't think that's been true for years. I think their union leadership that is in the pocket of the National Democratic Party believes that and sells that to the politicians that they think are going to represent them and make them richer. But I don't think their constituency, as far as the guy that's pulling a lever in Pontiac, Michigan, has thought that for years. And I think there's a disconnect. I think there's a big disconnect between the labor leadership in this country and the people that they claim to represent.
Well, I will say that in a lot of these rural counties in Wisconsin, Michigan, that voted for Obama did not vote for Hillary Clinton.
And there's a lot of reasons you could break that down for it. I mean, the African American vote was very suppressed compared to 2008, simply because there wasn't a black man running, and who can blame him for that? I mean, more Catholics voted in 1960 than ever before because the first Irish Catholic in the history of the United States was running, and they didn't vote 4 years later. So I mean, who can blame him for that? That's not without precedent. But what I'm saying is, as long as the Democratic Party is at war with itself, how can you hope to present a front that can be effectual against the wave election that we saw last year? And there's no other word for it. We're not just talking about Donald Trump. Screw Donald Trump. He's an aberration. He'll be gone in 4 years, whatever. What concerns me more is that we lost more state legislators, we lost more governorships, we lost more mayoral seats than we have ever lost before. And that should be of concern. And doubling down and going further to the left when you've just been rejected by the largest margin in modern political history, I think is suicide. And if that's what we need to go through, if this is the children of Israel wandering in the wilderness to get to where we need to be, then so be it. I just hope we come out of that time in the wilderness stronger, smarter, and better informed and better unified to take on what we've got to take on. And the longer we're going to sit in our little 18-year-old puddle, and the first guy I ever voted for didn't win, so I'm just going to take my little red wagon and go home and cry, or at worst, I'm going to go start breaking windows and setting cop cars on fire, the longer we will stay in the wilderness.
Nah, Zelda Fitzgerald, you cover your eyes. Hold on so tight till your tight bone flies. When you get nervous, you're always the first one out the door. Well, I'm surfacing now from the depths of your mind. And distance and gloom draw a magical line that separates us like a sentence or a fortress restored. And all I've ever asked of you is you to do what you need to. When you mouth the words in the song, I hope your tongue corrects him too. Well, keep on keeping on, let your garden grow.
Welcome back to Fake News Podcast. I'm Sean Jepson with Sean Caffrey and Jason Rains. In this segment, I want to talk about something that Trump did that I think was a good thing and I agree with. And I just want to pose it to you and see what you think about it. So during this week, Trump announced that he was going to take the full force of the federal government and crack down on human trafficking, which has been an issue in this country, and particularly in Atlanta. I know a few years ago, Atlanta was ranked the number one city for human trafficking, at least a few years ago. So it's an issue that hits close to home that we probably don't actively see all the time. And I think this is a smart idea, because if Trump wants to go after human trafficking the way he wants to enforce immigration, then I'm all for that. I think that would be a good use of the resources. But some other things, I think this was a smart political move on his part. He's been getting a lot of negative news feed. It's just been coming out that the administration has been in chaos and doesn't know which direction they're going. And the other thing I saw was across from the table as Donald Trump was announcing this, Ivanka Trump was sitting there giving an approval nod. And I believe that I'm wondering if some of this may have come from Ivanka Trump being a little bit pissed about Donald Trump and Kellyanne Conway coming to the rescue of Ivanka Trump after Nordstrom's decided to drop her clothing line. And that kind of became this joke. And Ivanka Trump, I have a lot of respect for her. I think she has more sensibilities than Trump, but she's also a very smart businesswoman. So I'm wondering if maybe this is something that she brought to Trump's ear, saying we need to do something, one, that would be not politically contentious, that everyone could get on board with. You can't get negative press for going regarding human trafficking. And this would also be a worthy cause that maybe Ivanka Trump is trying to push forward. So this is one of those instances where the politics of it, as usual, may not be wholly altruistic. But what do you think about this? What do you think about cracking down on human trafficking, Trump announcing this? And what do you think the motives are behind this?
Well, first of all, Ivanka Trump is probably Donald Trump's most level-headed advisor. Let's be honest. We elected the wrong Trump. All right. But, yeah, this does sound like something that she would kind of encourage him to do. I think that she is, from what I know of her, she's engaged in those kind of social issues and kind of presses him to take a stand on it. In addition to that, somebody over there, possibly Ivanka, possibly someone else, probably realized, hey, at some point you have to do something that people like if you want the news to leave you alone and stop talking about how much everyone hates you. But it's a good thing. It's honestly overdue. I mean, human trafficking is a bigger problem than a lot of people realize. As a result of it, there are more people enslaved in the world today than there have ever been. And that is jarring to hear. So good on Trump for taking it up, whatever his motivations might have been. I'm happy to give him credit when he does something right. Caffrey, what do you think, man?
I completely agree. I think that, in all honesty, this is probably an issue that is near and dear to Ivanka's heart. Being a clothing line producer, being that the focal point of her business, I think she has probably encountered this. I think the clothing industry in particular is an industry that is open to being dominated by producers that engage in human trafficking and human slavery. I think she has probably ran into this personally through the course of her business career, so she knows what she's talking about. I agree with your comments that she is probably the most level-headed, intelligent Trump in the White House at the moment. I've seen no evidence to the contrary of that so far. But I do think the timing of this announcement on the behalf of Donald Trump's administration is not altruistic, like Sean was saying. I think this is an attempt to change the narrative and to direct attention away from what, quite frankly, are some pretty brutal human rights abuses that Donald Trump's engaging in, like rounding up grandmothers and grandchildren and sending them back to Mexico because she got pulled over because her taillight was out. So as much as I love the fact that this is finally getting the attention that it deserves, and by the way, this is not the first time this has gotten attention. Barack Obama made this one of his issues as well for the last 8 years, and it needs to be dealt with. And it speaks to the larger corporate culture that is looking to purchase the lowest price consumer goods that they can possibly find. You know, this speaks to the corporate culture that Trump has enshrined in his cabinet. You know, when you have a Hardee's employee at Carl's Jr. that's making $7 an hour, is that not human slavery? Is that not holding someone in your sway for a below poverty level wage? I mean, this exists in a lot of forms that are not technically labeled as human slavery. I think this is a bigger problem than what the statistics show it to be. I think there's a lot of us that are in human slavery every day because we've got a job that we get up and go to that treats us like a slave.
I think I'm going to kind of counter that argument. Like there is a difference though between somebody who's working minimum wage and not making livable wages, and yes, that is wrong, but there's a line there between that and people who are forced into sex trafficking or who are being
absolutely. They're
bought and sold on the streets.
Absolutely, and that is an enormous issue, and it shocks me that is such an issue in our own country, because I would believe stories like this out of places, you know, in third world countries around the world where you expect to hear stories like this, because this is how they have obviously done business for years. But it happens right here. It happens right here, and you know, I think this crackdown kind of goes part and parcel. I fear that his motivation for pushing the human trafficking angle, which is a real epidemic in this country, will eventually be tied to immigration bans, crackdowns on illegal immigrants, because these are the communities that this affects. The people that are in the shadows, that have no legal rights, that don't have legal representation, that are afraid of going to their police officers in their community because they know they have no legal status, are the very people that are being exploited. And that's just a fact. I mean, a citizen of the United States very rarely is sucked into this. I mean, these are the people that live in the shadows. These are the people on the margins. This is the poorest of the poor, the people that the mainstream of America really doesn't care about until they see a horrible story on 60 Minutes about a brothel that exists 5 miles from where they live in Atlanta, and where these women are being drugged up and chained to a bed and are being forced to sell their bodies. And so... Do I question the issue? Do I think that this does not need attention because it's coming out of Donald Trump's mouth? Absolutely not. This needs attention 100%, and it's deplorable. But I do question the motives as to why this is now coming out of a Donald Trump administration. I guarantee you that if you really looked into the sweatshops in China and Vietnam and Thailand and Taiwan that are producing the Trump brand products, I guarantee you would find instances of what I would classify as human slavery. I have no doubt about that. I will say that with full confidence, without any research to back it up. I know that has got to be true.
And I think you're right, too. I think this is going to, if this is something that he sticks with, it's going to come back around to an immigration thing. You know, it's something that is, like we all been saying, needs urgent attention. But Trump his tendency is to link all social ills back to a couple of different things. It's inner city crime, or it's immigrants, or it's Islamic terror. And this is going to be, it's in the narrative that he winds up spinning for this. It's going to be an immigrant thing.
So do you think we should be cautiously optimistic then to see, okay, we'll get behind you. We need to crack down on human trafficking. But is this going to quickly the first step to cracking down human trafficking get all the Mexicans out of the country. Is that what we need to be worrisome then of? Is that he's going to manipulate this idea into something that?
Well, I can speak to that. There's a real example of that, Jason. I think you're absolutely right. There's a real example of that. He signed an executive order that directly goes after the individuals that take money from illegal Latino immigrants to transport them across the border. They call them coyotes. These are the guys that make money off of smuggling people across the U.S. border. And he signed an executive order last week that makes it a federal crime regardless of your nationality, meaning I don't care what country you're from. If you get caught with a group of people that you're leading over the border in exchange for money, then we will charge you, convict you, and put you in a federal prison.
Are we against that? Because some of
theory,
these coyotes work pretty shadily.
Of course.
They may bring you in the country and then
thing.
imprison you unless
It's
they
a horrible
extort
thing.
you for more money.
Sure.
And if not, then they'll send you into human trafficking.
Sure.
So this seems like a reasonable
And it is.
stance.
And it is. And it is. And if it were part of a comprehensive immigration reform package from the legislative branch, I would not have an issue with it at all. And it's hard for me to have an issue as it stands. But what this is a justification for what you're seeing as far as the federal administration's attack on illegal immigrants in this country, rightly or wrongly. It's a justification. Is it a real issue? Should it be addressed? Yes. But it should be addressed as part of a larger, comprehensive, legislatively passed immigration reform bill. It should not be an executive order. This is something I think that we could get bipartisan support for in Congress if he had given it a damn chance, but he didn't.
I don't know, because Obama has been trying to address immigration. It's been contentious.
And he had a Republican-dominated legislator that said no to everything. Well, that's reverse. So let's see what you can do, fellas.
Yeah.
You've got the table. It's yours. It is completely yours. So
I agree.
Do something. So do
something. When Obama had, made his executive order granting amnesty to certain undocumented immigrants, who's basically trying to reduce the number of undocumented people in the country, it was overturned by the courts eventually. But the line that the Republicans took on it was that it wasn't that they were against the order itself, like the contents of it. It was that they didn't agree with how he had done it, that it was something that should have gone through Congress. Well, they had the opportunity to do that themselves, and they didn't. Now we're back in that same situation. All this they have been saying for years, this isn't stuff that should be handled through executive order. This is something that should go through the legislature. You've got the legislature. You've said in the past that you didn't have a problem with some of the more progressive reforms that people like Obama had been pushing. So, put your money where your mouth is. Get something through. Stop it with the executive orders and pass a law.
I couldn't agree with you more, and that brings us back to an earlier segment. Okay. You got exactly what you wanted. You dominate every branch of government at the federal level and in most cases at the state level. So there's absolutely no reason why you can't get behind this. And I might irritate the discussion here, but I agree. I think that I understand why Barack Obama made use of executive orders the way he did. I get it. He was dealing with an intransigent Congress, and they refused to push his agenda forward. I get it. But I disagreed with it because it set the precedent for what we're dealing with now. I actually agree with Republicans. I did not agree with the fact that they refused to do anything on their own, even though it was their job to do so. But I did agree with the argument that it is not in the president's purview to sign things into federal law through executive action that are covered by Congress's power. And so there are no excuses anymore. You have no reason to say no. So you were trying to screw Barack the last 8 years. I disagree with it. I get it politically. And so that's what you did. Now you have no reason not to. So in 2018, one of the issues the DNC should take back to the states in hope of getting ourselves out of the dumpster that we're in is that, look, you've had it your own way for 2 years. You made all these promises. You fought the last president on these issues. So why haven't you delivered anything meaningful to the country? Instead of shouting, do your job at town hall meetings, the question should be asked, why aren't you using the power that we gave you as the American voter to do your job in Congress?
coming out of the sewers, they'd eat us alive. I caught your eye in the corner of mine, studied your mouth when you started to cry, 'cause the wind don't blow enough for all of our sides.
Welcome back to Fake News Podcast. In this segment, we have special guests Erick Dunlap and Michael Potter joining us for a little bit of beer tasting and discussion of politics. Erick Dunlap has poured us some beer. The first beer he poured is Mystery Ship from Southbound Brewing Company out of Savannah, Georgia. So, Erick, why don't you tell me a little bit about this beer and what we should expect from it?
Oh, man, this thing's funky. It's so good. 100% Brettanomyces yeast going up into this thing. It's amazing. It's a dry hopped double red ale. It's awesome. Try it.
On the can, I'm just going to say it says funk, tropical fruit, and subtle malt complexity. So are we ready to try it? And also, I see 8.2% alcohol. So
It's no jokes, hon.
It's up there. Yeah, it's up there.
Light. It's a proper beer.
You know,
all right.
So Bud Light ain't even beer.
So let's all take a sip.
Let's have a sip.
Cheers.
Let's have a sip. Cheers.
Cheers.
Yeah.
Ooh.
Woo. Lord.
Pretty yummy. It's pretty tasty.
That's actually pretty smooth. I mean, I like the tropical fruit, takes some of the edge off. But I can feel the punch underneath there, like a strong IPA or something.
Yeah, the 8.2 is definitely there. The 8.2 is definitely there. You can feel it. I mean,
this is 8.2.
Yeah.
This beer that we're drinking.
8.2.
Break down that flavor tree that has exploded into my mouth there. Right?
The fruitiness that you're tasting is coming from the Brettanomyces yeast. Instead of your normal like brewer's yeast that a lot of brewers use. It's like a wild yeast that a lot of American brewers have started utilizing. So if you see something that says made with Brett, it's actually made with this wild yeast. I think from what I remember reading, it comes off of a fruit. So a lot of wild ales and whatnot that are brewed like in open air vats will have this naturally occurring. You also find this in wine, though a lot of wine connoisseurs don't really enjoy finding these things pop up inside their wine. But in beer, it's amazing.
So what can you tell me about Southbound Brewing Company? What all do they put out?
They have a really nice wit. I think it's called Sunshine Wit. They have a really awesome Imperial Berliner Weiss that's I got to try last summer. Hopefully it'll come back around again. It was awesome. There's one called Desert Dawn right now that's out. It's this awesome beer made with berries. Can't remember. Yeah.
So where I do like this beer, and it is from Savannah, Georgia. Where would you recommend our listeners go, other than maybe Savannah, Georgia? Where can they obtain some of this beer?
Any beer shop that cares about good beer.
Any beer shop.
So your local connoisseur, your top shelf liquor store, and I think we all know where those are in our communities. I think that's where you're telling me that don't expect to find this in a gas station, but if you go to a good package store on a Friday night, it stands to reason that this will be on the shelf.
Very, very true. It's easy to find in Georgia. Maybe not necessarily this beer, but anything by them. I've seen them at every single liquor store I've ever been to. I've seen something by the brewery.
All right, the next beer that Erick has brought to us is called Rapturous. It's a raspberry sour ale from 3 Tavern Craft Beers. Tell us a little bit about this beer, Erick.
3 Taverns is out of Decatur, Georgia. They're pretty awesome. They also make probably one of the best pilsners I've had in Georgia. It's an amazing raspberry sour, super psychedelic can. Decided to try it last summer, and I'm really happy to see that it's stuck around. It's got an amazing flavor profile. It's almost nice peach color, not very much fizz, pretty sour, very raspberry. It's just an amazing sit in the sun drinking beer. Anybody can enjoy this one.
All right, are we ready to try this? Let's do it.
Yeah.
Bottoms up.
Cheers.
Ooh, that is sour.
Mm-hmm.
I like the smell of it too. It's not like a beer. It's like, it definitely has a fruity smell to it. What do you have to say about it, Sean Caffrey?
Well, I mean, that, you know, as a professional angler and general bullshit artist, I would tell you that is definitely something that I could sit in the sun all afternoon on a hot beach or up in the swamp with a line in the water, and I could drink that with impunity because I know I'm not going to be a train wreck son of a bitch when I'm ready to paddle back in 5 miles to the dock. And quite frankly, yeah, during the warmer months of the year, that's absolutely what I look for in a beer. I want to get stinking drunk in my boat, but I still want to be able to survive and make it back to where my truck is parked, and that beer would allow me to do that.
Very true.
And by the way, we do not endorse drinking and driving.
Or drinking and boating.
He gets back to his truck and then he
All
falls
right,
asleep.
No motors
Yeah.
involved, and my wife drives.
Just total disclaimer: we're just three white men drinking in safety.
This is all like, you know, conceptual scenarios. None of this has actually happened. We're not advocating drinking and boating or driving.
But if you
But
do,
if you
it's
were
pretty
going
fun.
to-
I like to advocate drinking.
So, do we got anything else to say about this beer, or I like it.
But
Where are they out of again? I mean, what is their origin?
Decatur, Georgia.
Decatur, Georgia. So that's a Atlanta area beer.
Yeah.
So
That's not down in the swamp somewhere. That is a Atlanta beer that's catered to the outdoor enthusiasts. You can go enjoy this with impunity.
Or the soccer mom.
Or the soccer mom. Absolutely. Quite frankly,
Yeah.
this country would be better served if more soccer moms were drunk. I'm just going to say that. That's an editorial.
I think you'd be
They
surprised
drive
at how many are.
too big of vehicles to be driving around drunk.
That is purely Sean Caffrey's opinion. Fake news does not represent that comment in any way. That's just my own personal opinion. More soccer moms need to be drunk on this beer.
They are drunk, but they're
They are
drunk on
drinking.
white wine.
Yeah, put your meth down and start drinking this beer.
On ice.
Once again, that beer is Rapturous from Three Taverns Craft Beer. We'll be awaiting your check. All right, so Eric, you shared an article with me, like something disturbing coming out of Arizona. And it's a law it's a bill that's being passed to include those who are involved in riots are now being included under the RICO laws that they have there. So they could be facing 25 to life and have all of their assets seized by the government. This is something that seems to be flying more or less under the radar. But why would Arizona feel the need to include, and they broaden the term for riot as like people who conspire. So you could just be there, or you could have just had, like, if I just had you and Caffrey out of my house, and then you leave straight from here and burn down the Alley Cat, then maybe I would be responsible for that. And the government.
I love you, Brian Crowdy.
And the government comes and seizes all my assets. So that's it. It seems like they've broadened the terminology, first of all, of what rioting is. Second of all, they put it under the RICO Act, which has been designed to go after organized crime. But now this is about just the opposite of organized crime. This is about as disorganized crime as you can get. So would you want to speak a little bit about that?
First of all, I think this is obviously an attack on First Amendment rights. I'm a big proponent of the First Amendment. This is scary. I grew up, my parents were both children of the 60s. I was told, if you don't like something, get out there in the streets and say something about it. I did when I was in my early 20s, late teens, early 20s. I found myself disenfranchised for other reasons I'm not going to get into now. I think it's appalling that people could be possibly okay with the fact that anybody could be against any kind of freedom of speech, whether it is protesting, burning shit down is also freedom of speech. How the fuck do you think we have the 40-hour work week? It wasn't done peacefully. It took blood, sweat, and tears to get things to happen right. It took blood, sweat, and tears in order for every American to be able to go home to their kids, not have to worry about working 20 hours a day and sending their fucking children to work. They were out in the streets. They were breaking windows. They were burning shit down. They were obstructing streets. Look at your fucking history, Americans. And then see if you're in the right.
That's Erick Dunlap, special guest, beer connoisseur and man about town, and political activist.
Every town.
From Athens, Georgia. That's all we have for this week on Fake News Podcast. I'm Sean Jepson with Sean Caffrey and Jason Rains and special guest Erick Dunlap. We hope you enjoyed this episode. I want to give a very special thanks to Tyler Key for our new theme song and Falco Brown for providing all of the music in this episode. Go check them out on Facebook and Spotify and go buy their new album, New Old Stock Part 1. And go check them out on St. Patrick's Day at the Vinyl in Atlanta. That's March 17th. And don't forget to like us on Facebook. Follow us on Twitter at Fake News Pod. That's at Fake News Pod. And feel free to subscribe to our YouTube channel. We're Fake News Podcast. See you next week.
Two plus two is all than five, and Elvis Presley is still alive. I've been walking on, I've been running toward the sun, and I have seen it, I have heard it. It ain't the words, it's just a little rhyme.